What is going on, warriors? We're going to kick a little VA butt today with what I'm calling the super claim, the straight jump to 90. Nothing's ever guaranteed, but this claim is a pretty good, solid foundation if you're just getting started. So I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time here on screen. I'm going to jump right into it because the one thing that I do hate about all these internet VA specialists, they go on blabbing about for about 10-15 minutes before they ever get to the point. You know what? I'm not the one, so here we go. All right, so as you can see here, we're going to start with a number of items for this, what I'm calling the super claim. I know, you're looking at this, you're probably thinking, man, I already got all that stuff. Oh, well, then maybe this isn't for you. This is for somebody that maybe is just getting started. Maybe they don't have this stuff. But if you put these things together on a claim, if you're just getting started, you're pretty much, as you can see, they're going to wind up at around 90. I'm going to tell you exactly how to get there. So sit back, watch this, get your mouse ready because you might have to jump back and forth in this video to see what I'm talking about. But here we go. We're going to start with mental health disorders or mental disorders. Here we go. All right. So your first big step to get to 90 is going to be your mental disorder. We're going to shoot for 70%. I don't know if you've watched any of my other videos, but like I said, I'm a firm believer in being an advocate for mental health. And if you have a mental health issue like PTSD, like myself, I believe that you either got it or you don't. And anything less than a 70 is unacceptable because the symptoms may vary on any given day. So in my opinion, it should either be 100% is my opinion, but an acceptable 70 or 100, with 100 being pretty severe where you have maybe some thoughts of suicide or even attempted some suicide attempts, or you've been committed in some type of way for your mental health. But other than that, if you're not there, I'm thinking 70% is where you need to be, especially for my warriors of war who've been out there, who've been in the shit. And, it's unacceptable that they would get anything less than 70 here. So as I've said before, you might be aware that it doesn't matter whatever your mental disorder is, right? Everybody always hopes to get PTSD, right? Oh, I went over there, I got PTSD. But there may be other situations. If you're watching this video and you're not a war vet, there may be other situations where maybe you got some other diagnosed mental disorder like depression maybe, or anxiety, or a number of any of these mental disorders that are listed here on the next few pages that I'll be showing you. So what happens is you either come into your VA claim with the mental health disorder that you believe you have, or maybe even your own mental health professional has diagnosed you with, and you have the documentation that you could submit to the VA with your claim. If that is not the case and you go in and you say, hey, I got depression, but there's no record of it, the VA is going to request a CMP exam, and you are going to talk to a mental health professional, either a psychologist or a psychiatrist, and they will determine what diagnosis you have, and they will confirm that, and it will be noted in the mental health DBQ. So we're going to go over that too. So hang in there because this is going to get pretty in depth. We're going to talk about getting the 70% rating for mental disorders, and you'll see where I'm going with that right here. So what's coming up is a list of the diagnosable mental disorders and their codes. I don't know if that would be much use to you, knowing the code, but eventually if you do get rated, that might be something that you become familiar with. So remember, in order to get a service connection for a mental disorder, you have to have a mental disorder or have to have the symptoms that meet the criteria for that diagnosable mental disorder that is listed in the DSM-5. So that's the diagnostic manual for psychological disorders. So the DSM-5, if you're not familiar with that, that is the manual for mental health disorders. So remember, you have to have that. So, one of the things that I get, particularly with PTSD, the DSM says that, there has to be perceived, you have to have a threat to your life, or you have to have witnessed maybe someone losing their life, or, something really dramatic. You have to experience it. There's certain things, I'm not going to pretend to have the whole criteria for PTSD memorized from the DSM-5, but it's pretty, it has to be pretty traumatic in order for you to get diagnosed with a PTSD diagnosis. So obviously, being in country, being in war, I don't know that anybody could tell you that, that's not a situation where you believed your life wasn't being threatened. So, go with that. If you get in there to one of those DBQs with a psychiatrist, they don't last very long. There's probably about a good, 40 minutes to an hour. I think they're usually scheduled for about an hour. But if you're a war vet, you get in there and you start telling some of the stories, some of the things that you saw, some of these psychiatrists, they can't handle it. These guys are civilians. You start talking about some, crazy shit, bodies being thrown, or, people being blown up, they can't even comprehend. So, usually they're like, okay, you got it. And they cut that, they cut that session short, and you'll wind up with a diagnosis for PTSD. So here's the list as it's shown in the CFR. So here you go. So the list that they provide in the CFR isn't very long, but in order to keep it kind of looking neat in my presentation here, I had to cut it in half. So here's the first page of that. A lot of things here on this first section, the first ones that are listed, they might not be that familiar to you. But here on this second page, you'll start to see things that are your more commonly diagnosed mental disorders. So check this one out. Spend a few seconds, a minute here looking at this and see if any of these disorders you can relate to. Now that you've gotten a good look at the list of the mental disorders from the CFR, actually you might want to go back a little bit and rewind a little bit and pause it there. Make sure that you got a good look at that, because we're going to be moving into the DBQ here. Before we do that, I just want to let you guys know, if you guys want to download a copy or just take a look at it while you're looking at this video, this is where you can find a copy of the DBQ for mental disorders. So there is a special additional DBQ for PTSD that basically allows you and your psychiatrist to discuss the very traumatic events that might have happened while you were deployed to wherever, or maybe it wasn't even a deployment. There are situations where, I've spoken to veterans in the Air Force, and, where they've witnessed aircraft failures and, things like that. So in the Navy, on the flight deck, they've witnessed some terrible things. So, but anyway, here is the web address for the DBQ for mental disorders. What we're looking at here, for those of you that aren't familiar with the DBQs, is the DBQ for mental disorders. So DBQ, again, is the Disability Benefits Questionnaire. And this is Section 1, Section 3 of Section 1, and then Question 3A. Now take a good look at these. What you're going to want your psychiatrist or the person doing your DBQ, you want them to mark one of the last two. Obviously, if you have a serious situation with your mental disorder, you're going to have total occupational and social impairment, right? If you get that mark, that's pretty much going to be 100%. You're totally 100% disabled due to your mental disorder. So unless you're in that situation, you're probably going to get one of these other markings. But what you really want for the 70% is that occupational and social impairment with deficiencies in most areas such as work, school, family, relations, judgment, thinking, and or mood. Take a real good look at that second to the last line there, because you're going to see it again. And I'm going to ask you here in a minute or two to come back to this page and take a look at that again. And it's going to show you something interesting if you're not familiar with how the DBQs and the rating systems work. So here we go. And another key section of the mental disorder DBQ is section 3, the symptoms. So you can read there on that line, for VA rating purposes, check all symptoms that apply to the veteran's diagnoses, right? So the more that you get on here checked by your DBQ psychiatrist or psychologist, the higher your rating is going to be. As you see here, this is the second half of that first page of the starting of the symptoms of your mental disorder here. And you can see here, they're a little bit more severe. If you get markings in this area, you're going to be in that middle range of maybe around 30 to 50%, rated in your mental disorder disability. So this markings here get you about 30 to 50%. Now here is where you start to get some pretty severe symptoms. So the first, along the top here, again, this is the last portion of that list. This is on a second page. I'm not sure exactly what page within the DBQ, but again, in section 3, where the symptoms are, this is getting towards the end of that list of different symptoms. So you can see suicidal ideation is one of them. You got impaired impulse control, such as unprovoked irritability with periods of violence. So that's one that you're going to want to take note of. If you're getting down to, you're having persistent delusions or hallucinations, grossly inappropriate behavior, there's a persistent danger of hurting yourself or others. These things, obviously are going to start to put you into the 100% range for your mental disorder. So obviously, I always, joke to myself or kind of think it's funny where I'm just like, all right, you're going to get 100%. But obviously, if you're in a situation where you have these types of symptoms, it's not a laughing matter. But if you see things that are towards the bottom of this here, you're probably going to wind up with something that's, the next step up, which is 100%, as far as the ratings in the mental disorder rating schedule. So it jumps from 70 to 100. There is no 80 or 90. So, if you're in this area right here, and you know what? While I'm here and I'm kind of showing you these things, it kind of brings me back to something. If you're watching these videos and you're trying to take advantage of this information to get a disability or a rating that you don't deserve, let me just say right now, and thankfully I don't answer to anyone. Let me just say right now that you're a shit bag. All right. So don't take this information and try to get something that you're not deserving of. So I can say that now. But yeah, I just use this information for what it is. I'm getting it out there to help. I've had people in the past say, you're coaching, you're coaching your veterans and stuff. And I'm like, yeah, hell yeah, I'm coaching my veterans because, all the other players in this game are all coached. Obviously the physicians are coached, and, I don't know that they're coached to, not mark certain things or find a way to make it not likely or less likely that, that it's related to your service condition. So I know they're coached, right? I know the raters, they go through a couple of years worth of training and they're coached on how to do their job. My point is that, if all these other people are getting trainings and everything, the only person that's left out of the loop is the veteran, right? The veteran doesn't understand what he has to go in there and say. So, he or she might go in there to their CMP and start talking about certain things. And, the doctor or, the physician, mental health professional is looking at this list because this is the list that he has to turn in to the VA. And, if you don't say some of these things here, right, if he doesn't interpret what you say as being one of these things that that are, have a little box next to them, then he's not going to mark them, right? He's not going to mark them. One of the biggest things that I hear veterans say, when they go in, the VA or any person that's involved with the VA doing a CMP, or even if you go to the VA for any type of health issue, they're going to ask you, are you feeling suicidal? Do you have thoughts about suicide, right? If you're one of those people where suicide has never even entered the realm of your mind, good for you, good for you. But, I've spoken to a lot of veterans and, they say, yeah, it comes into my mind, but, obviously I don't have a plan or I never act on it or anything. So when they go in there and the doctor asks them, do you have any, ideas, or do you ever have any thoughts about suicide? They just say no right away. I was guilty of that, even though, I've had weird thoughts and, and it's like, no, I never think about that. Maybe, most people just don't want to admit it to themselves or whatever. But, if you're sitting around somewhere and you're just like, man, what would happen if I just, I'm driving around, and what would happen if I just drove my car, off a cliff or something, right? That's not something that you're going to do. Maybe, hopefully not. But, that's something that when you go into the DBQ and they ask you that question, are you feeling suicidal, or, do you have suicidal ideation? And you say no, guess what? That's not going to be checked off, right? So, do you have impulse control, right? You're going to go in there and you might get mad, right? Might get hella mad by something that's really small, right? Just a small little thing, and you're getting all pissed off about it, right? This is what you're going to want them to mark, that impaired impulse control, such as unprovoked irritability with periods of violence, right? You don't have to go out and kill anybody or anything like that, but it's just that you react to certain situations, with either anger or, some type of violent response. It just doesn't warrant it, right? The situation doesn't warrant that type of response. So anyway, that's a long thing on this, but this is important, right? This is really important because you're going to see how it relates when the rater goes in to give you your rating. He's going to be looking at this DBQ, and he's going to see how many of these boxes are marked, right? How many of them did you, how many of them did you get out? How well were you able to convey to that person that was giving you the DBQ exam, that these things on this list apply to you, right? So, hell yeah, I'm coaching my veterans. If you have your inability to establish or maintain effective relationships, then that's something that you got to go in there and say, right? If you have the thought that I'm going to go in there and like, hey, no, I'm getting a divorce or whatever, I've been divorced already twice, I don't have any relationship with my children or whatever, but you don't mention that stuff in there, you don't go into detail, then the physician, psychiatrist is just not going to mark that box, right? So in one of my other videos, I talk about the 4138, the statement in support of claim. I would tell my veterans, sit down with this DBQ, right, and see what's in there. And when you write your story, make sure that it hits these certain points, right? If it does, if these situations apply to you, make sure that when you go into that CMP exam, that you are telling a story that makes that, physician, psychiatrist, or whatever, mark these boxes. So that's how you're going to get the maximum in your rating. One other section of the DBQ that I want to talk about fairly quickly here is the section 2, the history, right? This is going to be where the psychiatrist, mental health professional is going to talk about your history, right? What type of mental situation were you in pre-military, during military, and post-military, right? Remember, when you're in that DBQ, it is your military war service that effed you up, right? And well, in this case, that PH'd you up. But anyway, people will go in there. This is a military veteran exam, okay? You don't go in there and start talking about, your childhood and, what a bad childhood you had or whatever. You go in there and you say, you know what, I had a civilian childhood, right? After I got out of the military, I was already messed up. It wasn't the same civilian, I wasn't the same civilian that I was pre-military, right? It was that experience that I had in the military that changed me, that had an effect on my life, right? Prior to my military time, I was a regular civilian with regular civilian issues, right? But it was, again, my military war service or military experience that caused me to be all effed up. Okay, we transition here, right? So we were talking about the DBQ and talking about the physician or psychiatrist, the mental health professional, as they were filling out the DBQ. We talked about the symptoms, and we talked about section 3, the question 3A. Right now, pause this or scroll back to that section and take a look. If you recall, I asked you to take special note of the second to last. I believe it's a circle on that page that should be marked. Take a look at that. Like I said, scroll back to where I'm talking about that and take a look at that second to the last bullet point there, and take a look at the first line of this rating for the 70% rating. Again, this is just a section of the rating schedule for mental disorders. This is the 70% requirements that the rater is looking at. When the rater looks at your DBQ, those symptoms, right? Everything after that first sentence, it kind of finishes that first sentence, due to such symptoms as, right? Due to such symptoms as, all of these symptoms that are listed after that on the second line are the symptoms that are on that DBQ. That's why it's so important when you go into your DBQ that you make that that physician, that psychiatrist, make them mark those bullet points so that when the rater comes and looks at that DBQ, that he's comparing it to the this rating schedule. Where do you fall? Do you fall in the 70%? Let's look at the DBQ. Let's see what bullet points were marked. If there is any correlation, you're going to get that 70%, right? You're going to see, I talked about it when we were looking at those symptoms, the inability to establish and maintain effective relationships. Remember, I talked about, if you're going to divorce, you're going to want to mention that or something like that. I talked about impulse control, right? Periods of violence, unprovoked irritability with periods of violence. Those are all things. Suicidal ideation is near the top. It's the first thing that's mentioned as a symptom, right? As you're looking, again, go back, as you're looking at that list, suicidal ideation there on the list is where you start to get into your 70% range. Keep that in mind, right? Suicidal ideation, I don't know what's, after that without going back to look at it myself, but, after that, those things somewhere in there, you're going to see all of these, difficulty in adapting to stressful circumstances, including work or work-like setting. These are the symptoms, word for word, that are on that DBQ. So, I hope this information is useful to some of you out there. Maybe, I don't know, maybe, some of you already know all this or whatever, but, this is part of the research. When you go in to your CMP, these are things that you should understand, right? These are things that you go in there. I talked about the 4138, the statement in support of claim. This is why it's so important, why I believe that it's so important to have one of those written out, because, you want to tailor your responses and your, what you talk about with that person. Again, you only have 30 minutes to an hour to talk about all these things, and you want to make sure if these things apply to you, that that you mention them, and that you make sure that physician marks them on that DBQ, so your rater, when he's looking at them, again, they're word for word pretty much. When he looks at the DBQ and he looks at the rating schedule and he sees, hey, social suicidal ideation was marked off, right? Irritability with periods of violence, that was marked off. Difficulty adapting in stressful circumstances, that was marked off. And inability to establish and maintain effective relationships, that was marked off. Hey, you know what? This guy's at 70. So that's how you're going to get there. You need to be prepared when you go into that CMP. You need to be prepared with your story, what you're going to say, and you need to be prepared with this information here to make sure that physician, that psychologist, psychiatrist knows that he should mark these certain things, right? You never know who you're going to get. You might get a psychiatrist or a psychologist that doesn't give a shit, right? You might get one that's very thorough and talks about every little bullet point on that, DBQ. But, most times these guys are doing them all day, every day. They're just trying to get through it. They're going to ask you, what are your symptoms? What do you feel? And whatever you don't mention, they're not going to mark. They're not going to go any further. They just got to get through 5 more today. And, the sooner they can get done with you, the sooner they can go to lunch. So be diligent in your research. Look at every DBQ for every disability that you're claiming, so that you are aware of what it is the rater is going to look at and what it is you should say when you go into those CMP exams. Enough about the mental disorders. Hopefully I was clear on that. What we're going to talk about now is your sinusitis and rhinitis. So these are your Gulf War presumptives. If you're a Gulf War veteran and you served in one of those areas, you are pretty much, if you have these issues, respiratory issues is what they are, basically. If you have them, the VA has to assume that those are service connected because of your time in the Gulf area. So, a lot of things that we would get with this is, they'll go in, you're going to have a CMP exam and you're going to probably have some x-rays done, unless you have an outside source, outside healthcare system that has given you x-rays in the recent past. Usually if it's less than a year, especially if it's less than 6 months, the VA will take those x-rays and they'll use them. But again, if it's been over a year, they probably will request a CMP exam where they will do the x-rays themselves. So, but again, if you don't have record of sinusitis or rhinitis, this is probably because, in my own personal experience, this is because most sinus issues can be treated with medications that you get at your Walgreens, right, or your CVS. I treat myself. I've been going on for so long, with this issue that, I know what works. Either I'll get Benadryl or I'll get, Sudafed or something like that. And I've been taking this forever. Of course, there's no record of that. One other thing that, I live in Northern California, there's a season, allergy seasons, right? Oh, I have these horrible allergies, allergy season, right? But damn, why is the season being a year long, right? Why am I having allergies all year long? That's not allergies. That is sinusitis and rhinitis, right? So be aware of that. Those are things where you get in there and you're like, man, I got, basically allergy issues. I got allergies, allergy season. And damn well it's not allergy season. It's the middle of December or something. There's no pollen out there. There's nothing, that would cause your allergies to be kicking up like that. It's probably one of these issues. And again, if you could, most likely, if you were there, you probably do have, this issue. But again, if you're anywhere near, these issues with, as far as, you can't breathe right, or, your nose is stuffy most of the time, you probably have one of these. Again, I won't leave these two disability claims without showing you the rating schedule for sinusitis. Just for the sake of time, I won't pull up the rhinitis one, but here, what you're looking for with sinusitis, not really 50 unless you've had, surgery, radical surgery. This sounds like, crazy, but if you've had any type of surgery on your sinuses, definitely you want to shoot for 50, but 30 is most likely where you're going to be. And what I want you to focus on here to get this 30% for sinusitis is you read that second paragraph there. So the first paragraph tells you about incapacitating episodes, right, per year. So read through that, but what I want you to focus on is having more than 6 non-incapacitating episodes per year, right? Characterized by headaches, pain, discharge, or crusting. So 6 non-incapacitating episodes. These are episodes where you can take Benadryl, take Sudafed or whatever, and yeah, it gives you a headache, you have pain and everything, but you're able to get through it. I damn near had 6 incapacitating episodes every month. So, this is something that I really want you to sit down and think about. How often do I get these situations where I have a stuffy nose? How often do I get in a situation where I'm having to take allergy medications, right? Is it more than 6 times per year? Right? That's not a lot, just 6. And this is something that you have to say when you go into your CMP exam. They're going to ask you, how often do you get, do you have issues with your sinuses? Oh man, I have them, once a month. Once a month, that's 12 times a year. So keep that in mind, right? That's an or statement there, right? You either have 3 or more incapacitating episodes per year, requiring prolonged, lasting 4 to 6 weeks antibiotic treatment, or more than 6 non-incapacitating episodes per year, right? So that's an or statement, right? An or more than 6 non-incapacitating episodes. So do you take, a leave or whatever, Benadryl, Sudafed, anything like that, more than 6 times in 1 year? Think about that. And we move into one of my favorites, tinnitus, or tinnitus as I like to call it. So this is the horrible ringing in your ears, the disability that no one can hear except for you. So when people ask you, this is basically if you were ever in the military, if you were in a situation where you were exposed to loud noises, like I said here, rifle range, explosives, loud vehicles, aircrafts, there's no way. My point here is there's no way for, as far as I know, I've done some research on this. There's no way for, them to detect whether or not you have tinnitus. So, if you don't, like I said, if you're in one of these situations and you sit still in a very quiet place and you don't hear a ringing in your ears, then I'm telling you right now, don't apply for this. But, if you have to sleep with some loud noise on or a fan on or something like that, just to get to bed, or if you can't have it too quiet or you go crazy because of the ringing in your ears, tinnitus is something definitely that you should have on your claim. In my opinion, every veteran should have a tinnitus claim. That's an easy 10%. I don't know, maybe you heard about those earplug lawsuits and stuff. The earplugs that they were giving us, they basically weren't doing shit. So, stuff this in your ear and you got a big freaking explosive going off right next to you. Yeah, I don't know. Stuff this in your ear, you got a freaking, a freaking jet landing right next to you. Yeah, probably not. So, ringing in your ears, tinnitus, whatever you want to say, make sure that's on your claim. Again, no one can hear it but you. So, do I have tinnitus? Do I have a ringing in my ears? Hell yeah, I got a ringing in my ears. So, okay, moving into the last one here, your migraines, right? When you get in there and you're in your CMP, you want to start talking about migraines, right? Not headaches. These aren't headaches. These are, throbbing, freaking, I don't even want to say headaches, but your head is throbbing, right? So this migraine is going to be a secondary condition based on the service connection for your either sinusitis or tinnitus. But what I suggest when you submit this and you're filling out your 526EZ, in that section where it says, what disability, you always want to put, identify that you believe that this disability is a secondary disability due to either one of the issues that you're claiming on that claim that isn't service connected yet, or if you're going to throw migraines in there, throw a claim in for migraines at this point and you have sinusitis, tinnitus, or any respiratory issue or anything else, maybe you have standalone migraines for none of that. But in this case, we're going to say that migraines are secondary to either sinusitis. I don't know if you ever had one and you had that issue where your sinuses are just bothering the hell out of you. They can give you a pretty severe migraine, right? Not headache. They're giving you migraines, right? And do your research. Migraines, they're on one side of the head, right? They're different than tension headaches, right? And that's what, in the CMP, that's what they're going to look at, right? When they're marking on the DBQs, your physician, this time it's going to be maybe a medical doctor. Where do you have your headaches? Oh, I got them out here in the front. I got them in the front, or, on my temples, right? I got headaches. It's really tight in my temples. That's a tension headache. They're not going to give you the migraines if you say that, right? The migraine is that throbbing headache on one side of your head. Do your research. Look it up. What are the symptoms of migraines, right? What you're going to want to do is, again, pull up the rating schedule for the disability that you're claiming, right? This is the rating schedule for migraines, okay? What you're looking at here, in order to get that 30%, is prostrating. You can see here, if you guys aren't familiar with that word, it's in all three of these rated migraines ratings, right? Prostrating, attacks. What the hell does prostrating mean? Prostrating means that you lay down, right? The headache causes you to lay down, that you have to lay flat on your back, however, but you're laying down, right? What happens, in the CMP, the physician's going to ask you, when you have these headaches, right? He'll say headaches, right? Might even mark it. Oh, he responded to having headaches, right? So if he says when you have these headaches, you correct them and say, look, these aren't headaches, these are migraines, all right? And when I have a migraine, I have to go into a dark room with quiet, and I have to put something over my eyes and try to get over the migraine, because it happens, and it happens on average at least once a month, right? That's the key there. Look at the timing on these. Some of these rating schedules have times. How often do these disabilities affect you, right? This one, you're going to say, man, I have one at least once a month, right? Once a month I have one. You know, when was the last time you had one? Damn, I had one every month. I had one freaking every week. You know, almost seems like every day I got a dang migraine. But yeah, you know, you go in there, you know, and you're talking to them. Yeah, so I have to go in, I have to lay down. Prostrating attack. It's an attack that causes you to lay out. Basically, it lays you out. So, and it happens more than once. I have to go into the room, a quiet room. God dang, it's too damn quiet because of my tinnitus. You know, that ringing in my ears is messing me up. You know, that's pissing me off. Now I'm having irritability, and I'm about to get violent because of my mental disorder. You know, and all that. It's all a combination of everything. So, but again, I'm just joking a little bit there. But seriously, when you go in there, it's not the time to be polite when you're in there in your CMP, right? You go in there and you tell them, man, I'm all effed up. I'm all effed up from all of this, right? And it's all because of my service. And, you know, starting from the time when they walk in, right? Hey, Mr. Garza, how you doing today? Man, my freaking back hurts. My freaking foot hurts. You know, I didn't sleep right. I got sleep apnea. You know, my freaking sinuses are dry because of my, you know, my CPAP machine, and freaking the ringing in my ears is causing me to get a massive headache. I'm all messed up. So, you know, don't ever go in, hey, how you doing, Mr. Garza? I'm doing great. I'm fine. So just tell them, look, you know, if I wasn't here, I'd be doing a lot better. But right now I'm in a CMP for all these disabilities. So, with that, guys, let me see. What do we got left here? All right. Well, that's the last slide. I'm going to go ahead and get back on screen here and give you guys a goodbye. Remember, I'm not good at this, but please subscribe to this channel. Please hit the like button. I know this is a pretty long one, but guys, I could use all the support you guys could give. If any of this information helps you out, please let me know. If you have any experience with any of these disabilities, please let me know. Share it in the comments without getting too specific. Help your brothers out. Help me out by subscribing and liking this. Again, please scroll back through this information. Glean from it whatever you need. It's all free, guys. I'm trying to share this information so that you get a maximum rating and you get a little extra money so you can enjoy this wonderful life that we have. So hang in there. You know, again, none of this stuff is quick, but you know, we'll get there. A little bit of patience. You're gonna have to do that regardless. You're gonna have to wait, but hopefully the waiting is not in vain, and you're gonna get a higher rating eventually, and you're gonna get that back pay because you've been following my advice and you filed an intent to file, and all the evidence is there, and it's going to be all gravy whenever it hits your bank account. So when that back pay hits your bank account. So guys, give me a thumbs up, and I'm going to jump back on screen here and give you a goodbye. Okay, back on screen here. Hey guys, like I said, give me a thumbs up and please subscribe to this channel. If any of this information was helpful to you, or you have a buddy that you think could be useful, please share my information. This information is always going to be shared free. You know, let me know if you have any questions. Put them in the comments. I'll do my best to answer them. And let's do it, guys. Let's get you the maximum rating you deserve. And you guys have a good one. Your Devil Doc here. Hey, 22 a day. Let's take care of that. If you're out there and you need someone to talk to, you know, reach out to one of your buddies, reach out to me online, and I'll try to respond, and we can get some communication going there. So have a good one, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. Give me a thumbs up and subscribe.